Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about a relatively important topic, that of which is mobile power. If you're an outdoor enthusiast, if you like overlanding, if you like having amenities while you're camping, this video is for you. Mobile power is actually the battery system that's usually independent of your car's battery to be able to provide what they call a mini house battery for your vehicle. So that might be able to provide a fridge, your accessories, be able to charge your other batteries of your phone, your tablet, your phones, drones, whatever you're using in the outdoors, or in the case of an emergency situation, being able to power your radio out, or being able to power like a CPAP machine out in the field for those who need it. So when we look at the mobile power solutions that are on the market, you either land into one of two groups. Either you're in the group that you have a off-the-shelf system, or you've designed a system yourself. There's lots of pros and cons of each system, but one of the things I'm going to talk about today is how I designed my system and the considerations that went into it. Now, previous on YouTube, I have talked about how I go about designing these systems in a long, lengthy talk that details each kind of branch of possibilities when you design your system, whether you're going to go with an off-the-shelf system, if you're going to go a full-out van build, if you need kind of a minimalistic setup. I go through each of the reasons you would buy certain types of equipment and build out certain types of charging systems with the relative battery chemistries that are available on the market. But today I'm going to talk a little bit more about my particular system, which I built about 1.5 years ago to power my car through the sabbatical that I took throughout multiple national parks, going all the way up to Yellowstone from Austin. And looking at how that system has provided me the capability to have fresh food or a cold drink or lights inside the truck camper that I was sleeping in, it held a lot of advantages when it came to being able to survive off-grid and be able to go multiple days without a resupply. So today we're going to dive a little bit more into this system, which I'll bring out of the truck onto this table, and we'll go ahead and review each of the components that are in it. All right, so why don't we go into the garage and I'll show you how my power system is hooked up to my Tacoma. We'll also walk through in the front engine bay how it's connected as well. So let's head over there. All right, so the first thing to notice is we have lights. So the power system sits over there and it runs cables externally to here. Obviously that one allows you to power auxiliary gear such as lights like I have here. I also have cooking lights up here as well. And so this kind of a junction box allows me to hook up all sorts of things to it, including the fridge, which is powered as well. This is a big thing with overlanding or anybody who likes the van lifestyle. Having this type of power and accessibility is relatively useful. The next thing to cover here is just how it's integrated into the vehicle itself. So obviously it's sitting back there and it's a relatively flat surface, so I can go to sleep. But what's actually here, and we can take it out so you can see how it sits inside of the vehicle. So back there is the power system itself. So you can see how much it's nested closer to the back of the bed and how large it is in comparison to the rest of the truck. And so why don't we take these, sorry about that, water jugs out of the way so I can crawl up in there and we'll get a closer look. Okay, so the first thing to kind of notice here is I have an external panel that's hooked on the outside that allows me to, see different types of metrics, have external ports, also have access to the inverter itself. And when you open this up, you can see how it's hooked up into the vehicle itself. So luckily I have lights being powered by the power system itself. So this cable actually runs all the way to the front of the truck itself. And we'll follow that as we go look at the engine bay. This is what goes to the junction box that you just saw behind me that has all the auxiliary gear. Now this is kind of a test cable that I have sitting here just for test. But in terms of how it's set into the truck, I kind of have it locked down so it doesn't move. but it nests in between this kind of other board and my actual kind of 6-foot bed slide that has a lot of storage. But just in terms of how it's laid out and where it is in proximity to the vehicle, the reason I wanted it here is because if I have these cables, which are the cables for the solar panel, then they actually need to come out of the truck between the shell and up to the top of the vehicle where my solar panel is normally sitting. I don't have it installed right now. What I want you to take a look here is how this actually sits inside the truck and why it's routed back here. This also is the shortest run into the back of the bed that's not on the other side compared to the battery. And we'll walk through how that actually goes. All right, so now that we've seen kind of how it's nested in here, and we'll take a deeper look at it when I get it out of the truck. Right now, you know, it's kind of space limited and sound is kind of weird inside of the truck shell. But let's walk to the front of the vehicle and see how it actually is installed. And forgive the amount of movement that I have to get to the front of the vehicle. So let's turn on a light here so we can actually see what's going on. Okay, so kind of a first review. Off of the battery, I actually have 2 connections coming off of this, off the power. The first one is for accessories itself, and the second one is the one that is reserved for the power system in the back. And the reason I've split them up is because I want equal length runs. Here you can see that both power and ground are equal length runs from the back, and you generally want that type of balance, especially with the 4-gauge wire. And so here I also have a MIDI fuse, which is recommended by Redarc, Blue Sea, and a bunch of other manufacturers as the right type of slow trip fuse that is best for this type of application. But also, you know, I want it to look relatively OEM-like and be easy to service. So this is the reason they're mounted to the relay boxes where other relay boxes would be. There's also a quick disconnect here if I need to actually disconnect it. The Anderson style connectors allow me to just disconnect the power system itself if there is a problem, or if I remove the system at a later date, it'll be relatively easy to separate the two without any type of problems. The next part here is looking at how I've routed with the ground. So if you notice here with the ground, I've made sure that they've run you know, off where the alternator normally taps it. You can put it directly on there. It does get a little bit messy. I just get it from the very first place that it goes to. I might upgrade this one to be a little larger in the future, but in general, because of the chassis and the way that the negative works and how this is set in the chassis in multiple places, this is probably the shortest length run that I can tap off of without a lot of changes. But in general, you do want matched ones. So, you know, I've been kind of monitoring it and it's been doing a pretty good job. So as you can see, that's how this is actually run back here. And now let's take a look at how it actually runs through the vehicle. So the most difficult part is actually running it along the entire chassis of the vehicle. And so what I'm going to show you here is, and let's see if we can get the light. So these cables run right here, and they run along where the normal cables that are for the car, where they run through the frame rail. And I've tried to tie them as close as possible, not only for an OEM look, but it's probably how the truck was designed. You know, it's probably a lot safer just to follow that run. So if we watch that, you can see their first place of entrance is right there, and I'm following the main wiring harness for the vehicle. And, oh man, this is gonna suck. Underneath the vehicle as well, I'm following where the OEM harness has gone through. And now, if we look at where it enters the vehicle, that right here is where you can see the cables going in. Now, the other cable actually is my rear camera, but the two larger ones are the power and ground cable going into the power system itself. So hopefully that gives you a little bit better of an idea of how they're routed into the system and how the truck is kind of put together and works together as a single unit. Now, if we look at how it's laid out in the truck, one of the things you'll notice is, you know, I've kind of welded a mini frame back there to also hold the fridge in. Both, you know, you don't really want it rocking around, but this allows me to have the gaps around this to have the ventilation required to keep this fridge on at all times. Now, this system has been in for about 1.5 years without any faults. So, and it followed me through the long sabbatical trip, you know, across the US last year without any faults. So, yeah, it's been a really fun experience building that system. So when I get the system out, which takes a little bit of effort because I actually have to remove the rear frame that I built to actually house and height match over there, and I pull this fridge out, which is locked to it, we'll be able to have a closer look and talk about the power system itself. All right, we are back from the garage, having pulled this out of the vehicle. Now, one of the things I'll first point out is kind of its form factor. It's about the size of the fridge that's actually in my vehicle, which is kind of a nice size comparison if you can't really tell from the video. The next part is to actually look at what makes up its exterior. It's made out of plywood, and that's really easy because you can mount stuff to it. It's really easy to put together with kind of box joints. Now, another aspect of this is to make it look kind of good, but also high wearing. And that's where just straight up marine carpet has been stapled and glued into the entire outside. And the rest of my shell is done the same way. So it's kind of like a big, you know, kind of gray carpet along the entire inside of that shell. Now, let's point out the actual external features on this power system before we go into the inside of it. The first part are these ports right here. And you have USB ports, and you also have a 12-volt port. And what that allows you to do is hook up USB accessories and 12-volt accessories. One of the advantages to having it on this side of the unit is when it's located in my truck and I'm sitting down or sleeping, it is literally just to my left. So being able to charge my phone or access this front panel with relative ease is really nice. The next section is actually the inverter, which I very rarely used. When I built the system, I kind of wanted a modular all-in-one where I could transport it between different vehicles. Right now I only have one vehicle, so it might have been an overbuild situation, but it's relatively nice to have. I have used it about twice on the road, so you know, nice to have. It's about 1,500 watts in this particular configuration. Now, the next really nice part right here is I have a Victron monitor, and what this allows me to do is monitor the battery remotely from inside the vehicle or even outside the vehicle with Bluetooth. And that helps me understand the charging behavior, if it's charging well from the alternator, if solar's getting it enough recharge such that I don't have to actually turn on the car. Relatively useful, and being able to actually work on it from the outside is also useful because when I'm sitting next to it, I can just glance over and go, okay, you know, how much power do I have? Now that we've talked about the exterior of the system, let's go ahead and open this guy up and talk about all the parts that make up this mobile power system. All right, now let's pivot down and take a look at the rest of the case. All right, first things first, you'll notice this just a lot of routing right here to the battery, and this is kind of the main battery point. And it kind of holds the battery in place as well. And really, this plate up here that I've just shown you is not only used to hold the battery in, so you can see this little edge that's actually holding it in, but it protects you from really dealing with the positive terminal that's right there. Really, the only thing that should be exposed is that negative terminal, because you don't ever really want to expose the positive side. And the advantage to that is it really helps the battery stay in and provide a mounting platform for other accessories on the top if I need to have them in easy access points that are less risky than actually reaching in here. Now, one of the things I will note is that when you're reaching into a case like this, you really want to minimize the type of kind of positive, negative, hand burn type of, you know, heart stopping things that can happen. And that's generally why you want to separate the ground and the power to be farther away from each other. But with a case this size, it's kind of difficult. So the way I have it is all the power is routed down here and all the grounds are on this side. I do have to come up with another case that goes over this. I think the one that I had on it just broke, so I had to come up with a different one to protect this ground side. Now, as we can see, the routing down here, that's actually connected to the main battery, but these cables actually go and hit this main node first, because remember, the battery coming in actually goes to the Redarc first, and there's a charging circuit right here where this is connected that actually connects those two together. And what this allows you to do is it allows the charging side to be different from the battery side. So if I need to cut off the battery but leave the charging side enabled, that'll still work. So if I need to diagnose something, it's relatively easy. But the battery itself, basically as close as you can to the battery, is to have a cutoff. Now the next cutoff that's here is actually for the inverter. As you can see the wire going down right here. This inverter circuit, I usually leave it off because there's usually some like parasitic draw. But it's also nice to have completely turned off such that it doesn't affect your circuit. It doesn't accidentally turn on. You can see how big these wires are. Some relatively high gauge wire does down there. So something you don't really want to mess with. Now, these two are MIDI fuses, which are recommended for almost all purposes when you're dealing with this style of power. And so these MIDI fuse holders allow you to, access these fuses with relative ease, but also kind of they're stacked in a logical order. And also this is the main power bus for the positive side with the case on top of it, matching one here for the ground. Next, kind of want to detail how the Victron is put into the circuit. Now, one of the interesting bits here is, right, in order for you to accurately measure what's going in and out of the battery, the first place that really you have to be going from is the negative terminal of the battery itself, because that's, you're trying to measure what's coming out of the battery and not what's being taken up by other accessories before it hits the battery. Because there is that possibility that you can use stuff without it ever using the battery, and it's just using this power being converted to run those accessories and not actually pulling from the battery. So this is why this side is actually directly connected to the negative terminal of the battery. As if we go up, we can see how this is actually routed. So you can see it going up all along the outside to that side. Okay, so coming back down, this then goes to the negative bus. So you need the shunt to be here in order to accurately measure that battery. And that's why the first thing that the battery has before even the main bus block is the shunt, because then this is connected to the Victron controller on the other end, which then gives the capability to measure the current draw and the amp hours that are being consumed and what the charging rate, all those metrics are based off of this guy. So, you really need to make sure you place this guy before your main block, or else you're going to give kind of a weird, funky reading. You may not get accurate numbers. Now, I guess another thing to detail here is that really just how small the Redarc system is. And this thing is 40 amps. This is really the most you want to pull out of your main vehicle. And I've been watching the meters, and what it'll do is it'll start at 40 and it'll start dropping off, probably because the battery management on this Battleborn is starting to limit how fast it charges. So, it'll start at 40 amps and then it'll kind of drop to like 30, 35, depending on what the ambient temperature and charge rate is going. But really, really nice. I mean, I only have to drive for 30 minutes to an hour to really charge it to any reasonable point. And I've left this system on for like 5 or 6 days with the fridge on and still not depleted it. So relatively useful. And the nice part about the Redarc is it is made to go in an engine bay, although it's not in an engine bay, but it mounts easy. The wiring's really, really just sensible, and being able to both use, have a system that manages the solar and the alternator charging for you without having to worry about a different isolator or having to do, a switch that doesn't, do back current and fry things. Really, really useful stuff. And been rock solid throughout my trip. Now, I will say, in order for this particular one to work, it does have to be connected to a battery. So if you want solar to operate solo, this is probably, as long as you connect this to a battery, it should work. So as long as your system is connected right here, it should work. But once I take it out, this system doesn't charge with solar alone. So that is something to remember. I think some of their other products might not do that, but this one is literally made to only be in the vehicle, which is great, right? But just know that as a caveat. In general, you're going to have this system hooked up, or it's going to be freestanding like this and pre-charged, so you're not worrying about it. Okay, some other details. There's actually, it's a little hard to see from this angle. That right there is the bus block for the input of the battery to this charger, and it's kind of matched to the same gauge, which is that yellow wire that's coming out, and that just allows me, if I ever need to replace this, why I didn't just immediately wire solder that in, is because I need to be able to replace that in the field. So if I ever have one of these fail, which I doubt it will, or I want to upgrade it, all I need to do is put a cramp, one of the terminal ends on it, and this entire unit and all of its connections are essentially modular. Like unscrew everything and it comes out and it's all done. Another feature to detail here, these are the solar cables. And you know, right now I don't have a solar panel on my vehicle, but what this allows me to do is there's actually a trippable, I think, fuse right here. So I can go ahead and trip that if I need to, or basically break the circuit. And, you know, if I need to work on the system, it's a relatively safe way of using this while using solar as well. But, you know, I would say that with the solar panels on, even with 100 watt and only using the fridge, it essentially was indefinite. I've left the car out there in the sun for I think 4 or 5 days, and the battery never really depleted because it kept recharging based upon the amp hours that were coming in through that one panel. But that's based on the fridge usages. Other details, there's actually a fuse under here that's in line. It's a relatively thick fuse that goes on the battery post itself. I think it's a 200 amp. That's kind of one of those, like, if everything fails, you really don't want that to fail and just dump current, because this battery is different from a standard lead acid or AGM style battery. This thing can dump a ton of current on you in an instantaneous time because of its battery chemistry. So really, that's that reason that's protected. But, you know, I would say that that's kind of universal among any real power system that's in a vehicle, because, you know, if you get a short because of things rubbing against each other, it's a bad idea. Now, you may be wondering what some of these other cables are. So this actually is just kind of like a test cable with a PowerX on the end. And what I use this for is if I am powering one of my ham radios for HF, and it's a mobile power, this is actually the system that I use. And it allows me to essentially power one of my HF radios sitting in the back of the truck without having my car on at full power, which is pretty incredible. So, you know, I can transmit probably more than 100 watts, but most of my, you know, my Icom 7300 is a maximum of 100 watts. And it's just kind of nice to have a version of it that's not really completely regulated, mostly because if I need that full power, my other fuse box on the other end has 15 amp fuses, where this doesn't have a fuse, so I can use the full power without blowing that fuse, because sometimes I'll pull more than 15 amps out of it on an instantaneous fashion. So hope that gives you kind of a overview. I know that this circuit is kind of complicated, but it's really laid out in a logical order. Really, you have your main battery coming in, and it's hitting its first node point, its kill switch. This is the inverter kill switch, and you can see the connection between the two in the shot right here. And then, you know, you have your grounds, and then you have this section of the shunt that's helping you measure the metrics on the battery. And then you have your charging system that's connected both through the power, ground, and through the solar. Really, this is kind of just half straight off the reference data sheet for this guy, and a mix of sensible design post battery. So I would say that if you're going to design a system, this is probably as small as I go, at least with this battery size, just because you see that the room and working, there's a really high risk that you might arc like power to ground, or like power to ground here. Or if you lift one of these caps off, you really want to do a kill switch such that this battery is physically disconnected from the power side, which is what this switch is for here. So those are the considerations that I would make when designing a system like this. And then obviously nylock everything and just get it hard mounted. And you can see the advantages of plywood in this regard, because the plywood just allows you to essentially mount everything to a solid surface. So, you know, you can see this really hasn't moved in my, I guess, 1.5 years of driving, including off-road. But I guess another interesting feature are these hinges, which actually are lay flat hinges. So they can open up completely, and then they go in within themselves. And that's what it gives you the ability to have that kind of flat top without an exposed hinge or an in-cut hinge. Aside from that, I've been really happy about this system, and I based 2 of my friends' systems on this design. And And, you know, if you have questions, just contact me on social media or from the YouTube comments, and I'll try to answer.